Good morning. My name is Anthony Macrow-Wood, the Archdeacon of Dorset, and I'm delighted to be able to offer a thought for today. Several years ago, when I was on sabbatical, I stood in front of the Areopagus in Athens, where Paul had stood, and I listened to the words set for tomorrow's reading from the book of Acts. That's Acts 17, verses 22 to 31. In it, Paul says, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you are in every way. As I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.'" Now, Christianity burst upon the Roman world with extraordinary vitality, and with St. Paul at the heart of it. So what can we learn about this from this encounter in Athens? Firstly, Paul's courage and bravery. He was not afraid to go into the lion's den and preach to possibly the toughest group of skeptics he was ever likely to encounter. The Athenians loved ideas. They loved playing with them and those who espoused them. Preaching to the philosophers of Athens would be like taking on the high table of an Oxbridge college. And make no mistake, he often described preaching Christ crucified and risen as foolishness to the Gentiles. Crucifixion was the means of executing political prisoners, and resurrection from the dead regarded as sheer nonsense. So he was not starting with promising material, but he had confidence in God. In human terms, his message may have had little to recommend it, but Paul was confident in God and knew the truth of it in his own experience. His was a lived faith. He'd experienced the risen Lord. He'd experienced God's power to heal and save. So he was able to be confident in God. If we wish to be confident in sharing our faith, we need to be open to experiencing the risen Christ in our lives too. Now, secondly, Paul did his homework. He had found out the best place to go in Athens to make maximum impact and had researched his audience. Legend has it that in an attempt to stop plague in Athens in 600 BC, sheep were released on the Areopagus, a sort of hillside with the Parthenon on top. Each was then sacrificed to the god nearest to the shrine, whose shrine it lay down. If there was no temple nearby, the new altar was erected on the spot to the unknown God. I'm not sure I'd recommend that as a way to stop plague today, but Paul uses this legend first to compliment his audience on their innate religious nature, and then address them, showing his knowledge of the two dominant strains of thought in ancient philosophy, the Epicureans and the Stoics. The Epicureans taught that everything happens by chance, the gods are too remote to be interested in us, and death is the end of everything, so we should devote ourselves to seeking happiness. Though before you all decide to go and be Epicureans, you ought to bear in mind that being ancient Greeks, this happiness was to be intellectual rather than sensual. Paul refers to God who ordered creation as being not far from each one of us. So telling us what he thinks of that philosophy. The Stoics, on the other hand, taught that everything is a part of God, so everything happens because it is fated to. The cycle of history ends in flames and begins again, so we should bear our suffering bravely, hence our phrase being stoical. Paul quotes Stoic thought when he says, "In him we live and move and have our being." But in calling them to repent, he is suggesting there's something we can do to alter our eternal fate. Paul then was brave, had confidence in God, and had researched his audience. The end of the passage tells us a few people were converted, and others wanted to know more. You might think that was a disappointing response, but we're not told Paul was disappointed, no, because he was realistic in the outcome he expected. In Athens, he did not expect vast numbers to turn to Christ as a result of his preaching. They were too hard-bitten, too used to banding around ideas. But some listened, and with that nucleus, he was able to build a church in Athens. If we look at our culture and society today, we see it is increasingly coming to resemble the ancient world, a cocktail of competing ideas, a fluid, cosmopolitan society, a comfortable world in which people indulge their every passion with no thought of their eternal future. But equally a world and society that has received a profound shock in COVID-19, reminding us that we're not masters of the universe and life is rather more precarious than we thought. The public service and sacrificial attitude displayed by NHS and care home staff has been inspiring. A few weeks ago, prayer was topping the list of searches on Google. Churches up and down the land are reporting many more people participating in online services than might darken the door of a church building on Sunday. This week, a Comres poll found 24% of adults have watched or listened to a religious service since lockdown. Amongst 18 to 34-year-olds, the figure is 34%. So maybe the soil is more fertile than we realise. Just as Christianity transformed the ancient world, so it can offer hope to our post-COVID-19 world. So how and what are we going to do differently when the crisis ends? What have we learned as a church, and how are we going to capitalise on this renewed interest in things spiritual? Like St. Paul, we will need to be brave, confident in God, do our homework about those we're trying to reach, and be realistic about the outcome. Making disciples is a slow business. It is a journey, and one on which we are all fellow travellers. Amen.